When we're talking about show your priors, really what we're talking about is what is the deep causal model, the assumptions that drive your business from the customer problem to your solution, to how you monetize it, to how you go to market with it, how you scale it, what your revenue model is, your pricing model, etc. And then the strategic part is where do you apply that causal model? Which markets, which customer segments? The reason AI is developing so fast is because it constantly hypothesizes, tests, and updates based on the context of the world. So it's constantly testing and updating the probabilities of whether a particular hypothesis is true or not.
There's a lot of concern about AI is going to take my job. People are kind of freaking out, and to their credit, there have been a ton of cuts and layoffs this year because companies are shrinking headcount.
And you say, this thing will make you more productive, more efficient, code word, got your head count. You know what that middle manager's hearing? This thing's going to take my head count and remove my power base in this status hierarchy. P&L turns red. The question is why?
Hey everyone, welcome to the very first episode of Show Your Priors podcast. Michael and I thank you so much for being here. We had some technical difficulties during this first episode, so it will end abruptly at about 43 minutes. We apologize for that. We're working on ironing out those kinks, but nonetheless, we thank you for being here. It's very likely that you know us personally if you're here for this very first episode. If you could, leave us a like, a comment, and subscribe. It helps us out so much more than you know. If you don't know us personally and found us via the internet, leave a comment below if you feel like it. Let us know how you found us. We'd love to hear. Any other feedback, we appreciate it. We hope you enjoy this very first episode, and we hope to see you again next week. Welcome to Show Your Priors. I am your host, Jason Thompson, along with my co-host, Michael Nichols. We're joining you here for our first ever episode. This is going to be a weekly podcast. We are focusing on business, technology, anything that the world is moving towards in a productive way. So, tell you a little bit about myself. I have been in sales and customer success for just about a decade now. I have been servicing anything from mom and pop stores to Fortune 100 customers, and with success. So I think I have a little bit of knowledge in the sales and customer facing arenas. And Michael, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'll keep it relevant to what the show's going to be about. We're really going to be talking a lot about strategy and innovation, so I'll talk about my career on that side. I spent about 10 years at a company called Bosch, huge German conglomerate there. And what was interesting there is we ran an incubation or an acceleration program where we tested lots and lots of business models outside of Bosch's core business. We were testing out IoT businesses, digital business models, and of course, AI came up in that context. And so, what we got really good at testing 400 different business models was how do you, from inception to scale, think about validating a new business? How much does the founder matter? How much does the idea matter? How do you find good customer problems, et cetera? We'll talk about all of that. A little bit later, I went on after running that program and being at Bosch for a while, I went over to another German company and ran their VC and extended this sort of framework, think very deeply about how do you validate new business models, and got to invest in some companies and see how they're doing it and see how VC works outside of the corporate context. And then because I was annoying my bosses quite a lot by asking them, hey, what should we invest in? They ended up putting me in charge of global strategy and acquisitions. So got a lot of experience across what we might call the full stack there, right? From the idea up to how do you run an existing corporation where its business model is constantly under threat. So that's really the background that's really relevant here. Another fun fact is I love languages, so you're going to hear me talking a lot about that. Have a master's in Russian studies, and I think geopolitics will come in a little bit, but we'll try to keep it more to the strategic discussion when we go into geopolitics.
Awesome. That was a fantastic introduction. Appreciate that. You've got tons of experience in very interesting avenues. So I'm super excited to kind of dig into this with you. Now, you and I have, for disclosure, you and I have been friends for a long time. We started hanging out in high school. We played baseball together, and have just been friends ever since. Reconnecting every few years, it seems like, and we got together and decided that let's talk about our experience and what we're doing and what we see, and maybe we'll have some good input for other folks out there who want to know what's going on in the world. That brings me to another point as to what might be going on in the world, and that is you have a book coming out not too long from now in the future, and kind of wanted to let you kind of tell us about what that book is and what it's going to be focusing on and when we can expect it.
Yeah, it's going to be out in August. Found a British publisher called Emerald for it. And really, what it's about is the modern corporation is governed by the P&L. And it's we've been doing this since the 1940s, 50s. We've perfected the art of producing things at scale and managing them sort of deterministically. So as long as your business model is pretty stable, you can run the business by the P&L through traditional processes and traditional management. The problem comes when you're trying to do something fundamentally new. You end up in a different space, right? So where that post-World War II production space was pretty solidly stable for a long time, that's where you get like this boomer generation who believed you could do 25 years at the same company, work your way up from the factory floor to the president, buy your house, etc. That was the environment they grew up in. There's nothing to blame them for thinking that way. But it becomes problematic when you start to deal with a more uncertain environment, when you want to do something fundamentally new, a new business model. It also becomes problematic when your existing business model starts to fail. We'll talk a lot about that. There are a lot of examples. So the example is when your P&L turns red, the question is why?
Mm-hmm.
Why did it turn red? Now, the classical response was basically we can cut headcount, hit our, we got maybe a little bit too fat, and then we can hit our annual EBIT targets, right? And you would manage the company that way, try to get more efficient in other places. That assumes, though, that your value proposition is still strong, that the customer problem is still strong, that the customer trends are still there. Now, we're not really trained very well to track those things in existing businesses because we're governed by the P&L.
Yeah.
So those things that I'm talking about are what are upstream from that P&L, right? So those are the causal model that causes that P&L to either be black or red. So imagine, if your company failed and somebody asked you, why did you fail? If you said the P&L was red, that's kind of nonsensical, right? Like that doesn't tell you anything about why you failed. So when we're talking about show your priors, really what we're talking about is what is the deep causal model, the assumptions that drive your business from the customer problem to your solution, to how you monetize it, to how you go to market with it, how you scale it, what your revenue model is, your pricing model, etc. And then the strategic part is where do you apply that causal model? Which markets, which customer segments? So when we talk about show your priors and fatal abstraction, we're saying that one of the ways to defeat the fatal abstraction is simply to show your priors, test your priors rigorously, dispassionately, and then you can perhaps come to an answer how to pivot your business, sometimes how to shut it down. You might need to shut it down because your business model is just no longer applicable. And then in new businesses, this is where people have more experience. They understand their causal model because from day one, they are testing that in the market. They're testing the customer problem and they build it up until they scale it. And then you bring in these classical management techniques. So my thesis in the book is the reason AI is developing so fast is because it constantly hypothesizes, tests, and updates based on the context of the world. So it's constantly testing and updating the probabilities of whether something, a particular hypothesis is true or not. And businesses don't do that. At least the existing businesses, they stick to basically a 4 to 5 year strategic plan, which is normally just the P&L, some future version of the P&L with an EBIT target, a top line target. And then confusingly, executives will run around talking about uncertainty, but then saying we have to stick to the plan no matter what. Well, that doesn't make sense in a world where uncertainty is accelerating, where you have AI out there where people can just vibe code something within a few days. That doesn't mean they're going to displace the existing software or existing businesses. It just means you have now constantly enemies at the gate testing whether your business can defend itself. And as long as you're ruling the company by the P&L and not testing that context, you run the risk that these new businesses will start, well, AI itself will start to think for you and displace you. So that's the context is to say modern management needs to learn how to hypothesize, test, and update very fast,
Yeah.
especially right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the tools are being created right now to do that if they haven't already been. So with AI being able to come in and analyze your business within, minutes if it's implemented and has time to research all that kind of stuff. Very interesting. I wanted to dig down just a little bit on show your priors. I know you mentioned it while you were talking there, but I kind of wanted to just drive down as to what priors are because not everyone may not be familiar with them. And they're just assumptions, right? They're assumptions or also maybe referred to as axioms, correct?
Yeah, you could think of them as your prior beliefs before you take an action, right? So most businesses are built on prior beliefs of what actually drives the business. And you attach mentally a lot of times probabilities to those, right? So
Yeah.
you have a prior belief that if X were to happen, there's a certain probability that Y is the outcome. And there are assumptions or beliefs that drive that sort of hypothesis. Now, things change in the world, right? This shouldn't be shocking to anybody. That at some point, those prior assumptions need to be updated. And we'll talk a lot about that too. It's not just to say, what are those priors? It's also to think about how would you test them to determine whether they're actually accurate assumptions about the world. So that's really what we mean when we talk about priors. And the reason we focus so much on showing them is because of a lot of the discourse out there right now. It's people talking past each other with different prior assumptions.
Yeah.
And we often just assume that the other side has the same assumptions, or they're evil or they're stupid, which is not helpful. And it's at least my hypothesis that if we talked more about the assumptions and the causal models of our views and treated them more probabilistically instead of deterministically, which just means if you do X, you always get Y. In the real world, if you do X, you might get Y. You might get Z. You might get B. And so we want to talk about that, give proper confidence levels to our views, and be honest about what our priors are and what we think the probability is that they're close to correct or not, and then be willing to test them. That's really what Show Your Priors is all about.
Yeah. 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 We need to test the priors. We need to make sure that we're talking the same language, we're on the same page, and then we need to test our hypotheses and see what we get. Your book being on the innovation for the age of AI, I kind of wanted to do this first episode here, just an AI discussion as to what the roadmap might be, what we can maybe expect a little bit in the future. In your opinion, because you've done a lot of deep diving into AI and how it's going to integrate into business in the future. And so I kind of wanted to pick your brain as to what the AI roadmap is here in the next, 5 to 10 years. What are you kind of thinking there?
Yeah, well, the thing about predictions is they're very difficult. In a show like Show Your Priors, we don't want to be deterministic about predictions. And I think AI is one of these topics that is particularly, subject to what could be a fatal abstraction because it's not even clear to me when people are saying the word AI what they actually mean.
Yeah.
Do and we need to talk about that first. When we're talking about AI and we're talking about the direction it's going to run, what exactly do we mean? Because people have very, very strong emotions and opinions about AI, whether you jump on X or if you watch a YouTube video or a podcast, and it's never really clear what they're talking about, but they're very opinionated about it. Like AI, for example, is going to take all the jobs. Well, Which ones? And what AI are you talking about? So let's give the example of AI. AI is a domain, right?
Hmm.
It's actually covering several technologies. So do you mean large LLMs, right? Large language models? Do you mean machine language, ML? You mean vision? And there are many, many more subdomains. That's not really even getting into the applications of those subdomains. It's not getting into the business models that you could build. And it's not even getting down to the customer problem level.
Yeah.
And so people are somehow not even specifying exactly what they're talking about. Now, I suspect most people are going to be talking about LLMs because that's their most direct experience with them. The problem, though, is if you're not saying which one you're talking about, and you're saying things like it's going to take all the jobs, well, which ones are you talking about? And I think one of the best examples is that you hear recently, one of these deterministic predictions, SaaS is dead, right? You ask me what's going to be in 5 to 10 years. So people are loudly proclaiming SaaS is dead. And I would just say, let's challenge that assumption because SaaS itself is subject to potential of being a an abstraction to a fatal one, right? Here's the example, right? You see this everywhere. SaaS is dead. And SaaS, what does it really mean though? SaaS, software as a service. It's the description of a revenue model, a business model, or a delivery model. It covers so many verticals, so many different customer problems. It's not clear what people mean by SaaS. And if you think it's dead, tell me what bets you're making. What are you shorting? For example, are you shorting SAP?
Hmm.
You
I
think
wouldn't.
that a vibe coded app, right, is going to replace SAP? Or maybe you're shorting Salesforce. Now, I think when people are talking about these things, they're thinking about the features, the tasks that you could easily vibe code,
Right.
but they're not thinking about how deeply embedded a lot of these systems are, like Salesforce. Now, you can maybe give the listeners a little bit of context about how Salesforce is actually used in the field since you were in sales.
Hmm. Well, so let me just real quick. If I were a CISO, I'm just sitting here thinking, if I were a CISO and somebody came to me with a cheaper, claiming to be more efficient, definitely would have a better GUI than SAP does today. If somebody came to me with that as a CISO, and my thought process would likely be that this is just it's if it is a vibe coded app like we're discussing, the risk would be through the roof in my mind. That's the
Yeah.
part that these enterprise companies have down pat, or as good as they can be, because they have so much infrastructure around their product already. That somebody who's vibe coded something, yeah, maybe the software is performing better, but you don't have the reputation, you don't have the ecosystem built around your product that your Salesforce and your SAP, as these are the two examples we're using, have. And they're very sticky. They're very, very sticky. Salesforce for me as an IC, Salesforce is basically just a reporting tool. It hasn't ever, that I'm aware of, helped me make a sale. It has been something that I can report up to leadership. It is something that even if I do correctly and check every box they want me to, they still ask me for, how many sales have you done this month? Just for an example, that they'll come to me and ask me these things because they're so used to our employees not filling out things correctly that they will still come and ask me because they don't look at the reports first thing. They should be. But that is the main function of Salesforce, in my opinion, is to build a funnel, to predict what's going to be happening. And it's a reporting tool, for Wall Street, for leadership, more than it is anything else. It is an internal communications tool about what is happening in the field. And it's so much more than that. It could be if it was used properly. But
So
let's,
why does it stick? I think that's the thing we have
yeah.
to think about. What is the actual value proposition?
Mm-hmm.
So you're describing that leadership is often anxious about whether their people are actually implementing the sales plan, whether
Yeah.
they're implementing a new go-to-market plan, or even just doing basic due diligence in their sales. So it's like an audit tool. And that kind of thing, I think people underestimate that that is part of the system of value creation that Salesforce has. And one way to think about this is why does Microsoft survive? You got to think about this. So one of the reasons it survives is if you're one of the innovation project managers and you want to introduce the latest vibe coded thing or latest AI thing or even the latest SaaS tool, you have to go justify it to your management. And what will happen is, let's say your management lets you implement it. The first bug that comes up, you're in deep trouble. But if Microsoft has a bug, what do people say? Ah, well, it's
It's
Microsoft.
Microsoft. Yeah.
It's expected.
Yeah.
And so that value proposition is called cover your ass, CYA. And it's one that McKinsey has, consulting companies have. They used to say everyone buys an IBM, and you cannot underestimate this value proposition. People do not want to rip out an existing system and take a risk on something unproven. That's what makes corporate sales cycles so damn long, right? And you can't underestimate that. And then the other thing I think you got to think about is stop thinking only about the features or the surface level of software. For example, and this has already been true for a long time, you could build Facebook literally overnight at this point, at least superficially.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have any users.
Hmm.
And that's what we mean by show the priors of what you're saying when you're saying SaaS is dead or maybe a Facebook is dead, Meta is dead. Well, what are your assumptions behind that? Are you saying that you can vibe code something and get the same network effect that Facebook has, the eyes on the screen, so that then the ad, the people selling ads will, come to Facebook. That's their business model. It's really two-sided. So I think a lot of times we're pretty naive about how deeply embedded business models and systems are. And that's a good example of you need to think through all of your prior assumptions and whether they have a high probability or not of being true. And in the case of SaaS is dead, specify the business, tell us your hypothesis, and then we can give, like test cases. How could you test whether this is true or not? And then we can give you a good analysis of whether the probability is higher or lower.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really what we're talking about.
Yeah. Um, so what do you think? I mean, there's a lot of concern in the market right now. To change it up just a little bit, there's a lot of concern about AI is going to take my job. People are kind of freaking out, and to their credit, there have been a ton of cuts and layoffs this year because companies are shrinking headcount across the board almost because of AI investing. And it is because we're building AI infrastructure, we're investing in that industry right now. I think it's not because AI is replacing our jobs at this point in time, but it is because we are cutting so that we can make those investments in the future. And I expect those jobs to start coming back where they've been cut. But right now people are justifiably freaked out about it. And I kind of wanted to call to something of the past. And this was talked a little bit more about when driverless cars started hitting the market. But, people freaked out when elevators started being automated. When the elevator operator, it was an intrinsic part of people's lives to have an elevator operator take you to your floor. They needed to stop the car, open the door for you. It was a little bit of a complicated mechanism. But to us today, and at least in my lifetime, I was born after that was a thing. I haven't even thought about that. It's not something that, having someone operate an elevator for me seems very, very unnecessary. And it's not something I ever thought about as a security concern or a risk. So what is your take on the AIs replacing the job market? Is it going to replenish itself, or is it going to be something that hurts us and we should cash out our IRAs right now, like Elon Musk says?
Well, first of all, I think the AI optimists aren't doing a very good job of marketing AI,
Yeah.
right? If you're screaming to the high heavens, it's coming for all your jobs. Well, you can be damn sure guaranteed that people who have jobs are going to say, "You're not taking my job," and they're going to start petitioning Congress or local governments. And they're going to start throwing barriers, and I'm sure we'll come to that. But I have a question about whether the cuts that you're seeing have to do with just corporates doing typical fat trimming,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Just to hit their annual EBIT targets, and they're using AI as cover,
Hmm.
or whether they're actually investing in AI, because I think there are some numbers out there that say a lot of the AI investments or tools they're currently implementing are not showing any returns. It's maybe like 60, 70% of those things are failing.
Yeah.
And that could be because corporate execs don't know how to use AI. They're not AI experts. Or it could be we just haven't figured out where the extra efficiency and productivity is going to come from. And I remember this in the IoT space that people were claiming you would get all these benefits in production from IoT, but you had to realize that these factories were already super efficient and that you're asking them to take on an extra cost when it may already be so efficient you can't distinguish the value, right? And so I don't know, and this is about saying what the priors are. I've even seen some studies where they're saying we're already starting to see some of the AI productivity come through, but it's not clear to me. If you're just firing people, the denominator there is is going down. It doesn't mean that AI is the reason they're getting fired. It could be just this typical eBay game. Now
Yeah.
that's not to discount what AI could do for existing corporations. I think we can all find examples there. But again, which jobs are you talking about? And I want to give an example of how hard it can be to sell into corporate. Let's imagine you come to some middle manager and you pitch to the middle manager your AI tool, whatever it is, or AI product, and you say, this thing will make you more productive, more efficient, code word, got your head count. You know what that middle manager is hearing? This thing's going to take my head count
Yeah.
and remove my power base
Yep.
in this status hierarchy. So this is something you have to understand is that these corporations and existing companies are status hierarchies,
Yeah.
and people will fight like hell to maintain their status. So it doesn't help your marketing out when you're out there saying it's going to displace everyone. Probably what you need to be thinking about is how can it augment their productivity, right?
Hmm.
How can you help these people keep their jobs and become super productive, become a 10x middle manager instead of a 1x, right? That this is a marketing message that has a better chance to land than just screaming it's going to take all the jobs. Now, one of the most live examples we see of where people are already fighting back, and I expect that to keep happening, is the New York legislature, right? Proposing a law to say AI can't enter into the legal space, or you can't use AI for legal advice, you can't use it for medical, etc. And this is a predictable result of telling everyone you're going to lose your jobs. Now, lawyers and doctors have a lot of status. It's essentially a medieval guild, right?
Yep.
You have to get, it's heavily licensed. You have to go through lots of barriers to actually become a doctor. You can be sure they're going to fight back to make sure that they protect their guild. And since legislatures make law, lex, Latin, right? They are mostly made up of lawyers. Maybe it's different in New York, I don't know, but lawyers tend to go into politics. Most politicians did law at some point. Now, you can scream if you're on the AI optimist side that this is just regulatory capture. Well, maybe
Yeah.
that's what it is, but it's also due to your own screaming, right?
Hmm.
Your own marketing backfiring. And I guess you're going to see this happen more often as people start to think, hey, what should government be doing about AI? And you've seen it in Europe, they went even farther ahead with their GDPR and the AI Act. Maybe they went too far. That's something we could also talk about later. But I think this is what you have to be aware of when you're screaming at a very abstract level
Big
about
news,
AI and not
America!
specifying exactly what you mean. I think it's only a matter of time before you evoke this reaction.
For sure. I was just kind of looking up some instances where what might have led to this, because I think what the law is in New York is actually about therapists and is about lawyers actually appearing on behalf of somebody in court. And early on, when AI was on the scene, this actually happened. That a gentleman used AI as he used it. This is the video clip of it right here. This is an AI generated person that is addressing this court on behalf of his client, and it's someone AI, and the judge gets really upset
Clever.
about it. Clever, but I think this is something that directly precipitated these kind of laws.
Well,
So,
there are other problems,
mhm,
right? That, and this goes back to the driverless thing. You have to remember with new technologies, for some reason, people are very skeptical of them. We talked about automated driving. The standards are simply different. So humans can make errors driving every single day, but one automated vehicle has an accident or a fatality, and you're in the news over and over, right?
yeah,
If it bleeds, it leads. But none of those daily accidents, which cause fatalities due to human error, are broadcasted because for the news, they're not so interesting because they happen all the time. So when you're doing something fundamentally new, having one bad case can put you on the politician's chopping block, right? I mean, that's the way to think about it. And in law, to be fair to these legislatures, people, they're highly, um, what would you say? There are these examples that had a lot of awareness, right? A lot of
mhm,
publicity where lawyers were using LLMs for their court cases and there were hallucinations in there. And
that's a
those
problem.
are spread all over the news. That's a problem.
Yeah,
They don't even exist, these cases. And judges rightly reprimanded those lawyers. So you have to be aware with these new technologies when you're out there just throwing vibe coded stuff, just build it out into the market. If there are fundamental problems and anti-AI sentiment is growing, you can be sure that even if it's one out of 1,000 cases, that one case is going to be blown up. And I think that's what we have to realize when we're talking about the potential for AI. What do we mean? We're talking LLMs, which business applications? But because you've branded it as AI, even if it's only one of those applications where the problem lies, you're now causing perhaps the whole AI house to go down because you branded it that way.
yeah, yeah.
So those are some of the thoughts I have around that. And I think and AI optimists have to realize this too. The skeptics have reasons to be skeptical. We should acknowledge them. And actually, that's a good place to look for potential value propositions. Addressing their skepticism could be of immense value to them. In Europe, it's privacy.
Yeah.
Can you address privacy with AI?
I
Don't know.
see AI causing more. I mean, yes, you can. I would assume you can train AI to better privacy, but I see more of a negative with privacy and AI. I mean,
And many do.
that's the concern, and I think that was part of Anthropic's stance against working with the government and not having their. That was one of their core values, was not being part of an AI surveillance network that caused them to break ties with the government and contracting there.
Right.
I did have, you had talked about the car death rates, fatality rates. So I pulled up an example here. And I want to point out that this is 48,000 annual deaths. This is tracking annual deaths. These are just motorists who have fatalities. I looked up just an article right before this, and it was, I think 329 was the number of injuries that have happened from driverless vehicles to this point in time. So
And they get all the attention.
and
They
they
get
get
all the
all the attention.
attention.
It's the same thing with nuclear power, right? It is that when it's not, that's a bad analysis, because when a nuclear disaster happens, it is very large in scale, and so therefore it gets a lot of attention and a lot of media. But it is that attention and media that hurts motorless driving right now as well. Even though the numbers are way low, it is a scary proposition to be out of control.
Yeah.
And but we need to
Let me
have
tell you
insight.
the
Hmm.
maybe I'll tell you the psychological mechanism behind it. It's a
Yeah,
particular bias called availability bias,
yeah,
where you don't think about the base rates. And people need to realize, and you see this with shark attacks, airplane attacks, or airplane crashes, right? That they're in the news because they're rare. But because they're in the news, the human brain, because they're available to the human brain, we overestimate the probability of these things happening. So people are scared to death of an airplane, when I don't know if you remember the Dumb and Dumber when he's on the way to the airport in the
Of
limo and
course.
he's looking backwards. That's actually the true thing. You're much more likely to die on the way to the airport than actually in the air, right? So this is called availability bias, and it's something you have to watch out for whether you're an optimist, where you forget those base rates and you think about only one use case and you only show the one positive thing with while ignoring all the negative, or the reverse on the skeptic side, that you ignore all the positive things that AI does while hyper focusing on one outrageous event.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean you shouldn't look at those the positives or the negatives. It means you need to keep it into context. How probable actually are these things? And here, and this has to do, I told you I studied Russian history. It goes back to the Stalin quote. I forget the exact words, but it's something like, one death is a tragedy, a million is a statistic.
Yeah.
And that's that mentality we have. It's part of our psychology that those 48,000 driver deaths caused to human error are not as interesting because they happen all the time. Every one of them is a tragedy to the family, but because you've aggregated the statistic, they're just not very interesting. Whereas the 320 something, I think you said three or
Yeah.
whatever it
330.
was, 300,
330. Yeah.
yeah, 330, automated driving accidents, those are interesting for many reasons. People are skeptical of new technologies, and there are fewer of them, which you can hyper focus on and blow it up. And then people get scared of this. And you just have to recognize this is the business model of news to focus on low probability, interesting events that scare you or outrage you.
Yep.
It's also the business model of politicians to focus on those things because they bring publicity to the politician. But it also means that if you're not careful about your marketing, that you may be regulated for something that just doesn't really happen.
Yeah.
Not
It's
very
a
often.
Yeah, it's a very attention driven economy right now. I'm sure everyone's heard that at some point or another, but it's something you have to keep in mind whenever you hear these type of statistics or these stories that they might just be a one-off thing, but because of they're a hot button topic and they grab attention, they're going to get published over and over and over, and that we're going to be inundated with these negative stories about AI or driverless cars. And we have to just take everything with a grain of salt. We have to take a step back because everybody is competing for our attention today in the social media world, in the world of TikToks, in the world of TikTok shops now, where everyone wants to be the newest QVC for some reason.
Yeah.
It's just a very strange attention grabbing world out there now that we've kind of developed into. And, someone who is later on in life is this is a completely foreign system to them. Like my mother, who is a boomer, God love her, she falls for almost everything these days. And I try to, guard that as much as I can, but she's a click away from giving her information to somebody all the time. And it's a really kind of scary thing. And everyone needs to take a step back and say, what exactly is the context here? What are the priors? What are the assumptions of this?
Exactly.
Because you can get in trouble out there today really easily, and news can skew your perspective into a way that's not necessarily reality if you let it.
And
Because
social media does that,
yeah,
right?
oh yeah,
So when you're on X, you have this feeling that AI, this huge wave is coming, it's going to replace all the jobs.
yeah,
You step outside of X, maybe go to LinkedIn or just actually walk outside of your house. Nobody's talking about AI that much, right? It's
yeah,
not really affecting their lives. They're thinking about the walk they're going to take on the weekend, the swim meet they got to go to, the piano lessons, and AI is just not a part of their life. So that echo chamber worsens your probability calculation. You assume everybody is interested in AI only because you are. And if you have a business idea, you need to think about that. Hey, is it only these few people on X that are hyper focused on AI, or actually people in the real world? Are they thinking about it at all? Who might actually be the buyers? So that's why priors thinking, which is, I think, inherently related to probabilistic thinking, will help us have better discussions because whenever you see something on social media that makes you feel outraged, just ask yourself, what is the probability of this thing happening?
right,
How often does it happen? Before you freak out, before you call your congressman, doesn't mean don't worry about it. It just means, as you said it beautifully, properly contextualize it.
Yeah, yeah, you have to. You have to take everything with a grain of salt today. If I mean, you can't even believe what you see with AI videos today with Sora, that type of thing. You have to sometimes click at the comments, which is interesting. That's an interesting thing with now with rage baiting and getting interaction. It happens to me quite a bit. My Instagram feed is actually trash because somebody
Yeah.
posted something confusing, and I go to the comments immediately to see, what is this post talking about? And now, because I've done that once, Instagram keeps feeding me with the same the same type of crap that is just crap. But I interacted with it one time, so now it knows that
Yes.
I will do that. And it just
Well,
keeps
and
doing it.
it, yeah, and it's strange too because I'm a generalist and I'm interested in lots of things. So I imagine Amazon thinks I'm crazy or the algorithm thinks I'm crazy because because of my behavior, I intentionally, well, not intentionally, just through my behavior, I limit my exposure on X. I limit the potential for engagement because I'm not specialized, hyper specialized on a specific topic, right?
Yeah.
That's how those algorithms work. They literally take you down the rabbit hole, right?
Hmm.
And if you're not careful, you can be taken down the wrong rabbit hole into the rage bait chasm, right?
Yeah.
And you just got to be aware of that that's happening to you. Be aware of how algorithms work. Be aware of how probabilities work, how your biases are at work. Everybody understands biases when it's everybody else. They just forget that they themselves are also subject to it.
Yeah.
Speaking of the driving one, if you did a survey of how many people think they're actually a good driver, it's like well above average, right? Everyone thinks they're a good driver. They just think their neighbor's horrible. But it's literally impossible for everyone to be above average, right? That's the whole point of average.
Yeah.
So, um, I think that's also what this show's about is to expose ourselves to our biases and think deeply about them and show how that applies in strategy and innovation too.
Yeah. I have the normal distribution curve up here just to kind of drive home that point of, and that's a great point. And, everyone does think they're an above average driver, and it's just simply not possible. Half of us are above average drivers, only half.
Yeah. Well, imagine VC, right? Venture capital,
Oh, yeah.
where the base rate for finding a successful venture or a unicorn at seed or pre-seed is 0.5%. Yet every VC thinks they have this ability to detect them. Well, clearly something's going wrong there.
Yeah.
Clearly,
Yeah.
a lot of them don't have this ability. So on the one hand, they make that claim that they have this unique ability to find those bets. On the other hand, they're playing the power law game that we have to make tons and tons of bets, which suggests that you probably don't have this skill. It's just more about deploying the capital across many bets, hoping, praying that that one bet pays off. Now, you can find successful examples of VCs who do this, which leads you to another bias called survivorship bias. Every time you point to the one VC while ignoring the thousands of others who have failed, that's survivorship bias. You're again not considering the base rates.
Yeah.
We do this in benchmarking a lot, or these hero stories of the entrepreneur that people like to read these books about heroes. And then that entrepreneur will then go out and try to sell you. If you just follow my script, you'll be successful too, not realizing that that success that that entrepreneur had was super rare and it might be idiosyncratic, meaning not repeatable. And so if you're trying to one way to think about this is if you read about Michael Jordan
Hmm.
and his practice habits, will you become Michael Jordan?
Very unlikely.
Very unlikely, right? And we both come from sports. Some people have genetics that lends itself to talent that others
Yep.
just won't have. Some people do work hard. Sometimes it really is about the practice. But at the highest levels where Jordan is rare among the rarest, we need to think about that, right? Be
Yep.
careful when you're reading these hero stories that you can actually take valuable lessons away from that apply to your own career and life.